Hi there, welcome to the Archiware P5 archive module video. In this video we're going to cover the archive module, which we can see here at the top. As I'm saying at the beginning of all these videos at the moment, you need to look at the clients video to understand what clients are and what they do and how you configure them, because they're relevant to archive, as is the storage manager, where we configure our tape libraries or disk storage. And also pools and volumes are relevant to archive, so there's a good chunk of the storage side of what's needed, what you need to know to do archiving, that's been covered in those other videos. So assuming that you're up to speed and you understand that archive plans need to have a pool of type archive available to write to, and in that pool there needs to be some volumes, as there is in this case. There's 4 volumes here. These volumes could either be tape, physical tape, 4 tapes, or files on a disk library. We've got a disk library configured on the desktop here, and the bottom 4 of these files here are container files, which are part of a pool such that they can receive archive data. So clicking on the archive plan, we begin by creating a new archive plan. So hit the new button. So hit the new button at the bottom there, and you will be presented with the archive window. First thing, as with backup, is that you need to give a name. So let's call this one Training Archive and apply. So first thing is the name, otherwise you can't actually edit any of the other properties of the archive plan. So the basics of the archive plan are covered on the first panel. So there's a target pool here, and we only have one pool that is of type archive, so it's just showing us the one pool that's applicable here. The target index, again, there's a single archive index created on installation, and that index is pre-selected for you. So unless you're looking to create your own custom archive indexes or have multiple archive indexes, there's really nothing to do on the target index selection. There will be a more advanced video on archive covering creation of additional archive indexes, so flick over to that one if you want to learn a bit more about the archive indexes. And there'll be a general advanced video which will cover file filters. So those 2 things are advanced things that you don't need to cover, just to cover the basics. But you do need to create and make volumes available in a pool and select that pool on the first panel of the archive plan, such that when you use this archive plan, it knows where to write the archive files to. At the bottom there's a list of groups. So this is for allowing regular users, so not the administrator of Archiware, to perform archive jobs and do restores themselves. If you want to allow regular users to do archiving, you can do that, and if you want to restrict who can use this archive plan, you provide the name of groups in here in a list. So you might say admin if you only wanted admins to use the plan. In the general advanced topics video, there will be a description of how to allow non-administrators to come in and do archiving and make restores and things like that. So again, that's covered in another video, lots of other videos to think about. So there are a number of different pages of options, 6 to be precise, in configuring an archive plan. They're not all necessary for doing simple archiving. I'm not going to go through every page. I'm going to first look at automatic archive, because this is where you configure the archive plan to run on a schedule and archive a folder or list of folders on a repeating basis, a bit like the backup plan would run. There are 2 ways that you can trigger archiving of files from disk over to disk or tape, and rather than explain that without any illustration, I'm going to just flick to my scribbling pad to show you how this works. So let's think about the 2 different ways that we can archive. Let's start off of our drawing with a disk, and this is a disk that is filling up, and maybe it's a RAID, and it's very full because it's got lots of files on it. There's not a lot of space, and the user wants to take the contents of this disk and move it to, let's say, tape, and they've got a big tape library, lots of tapes in it. lots of capacity for relieving the space from over here and moving the data. So there are two different ways of doing this. Number one is manual archiving. So manual archiving basically involves that you use the web interface up here and you browse the storage down here. So you might provide entry into a particular folder that might be the shared folder where all of the production work is, for example, and you can browse this folder, choose some files, add them to a basket, and then trigger the job to perform the archiving there and then. So that's manual archiving, and that involves access to the web interface. So somebody would have to understand how to use the web interface and log into the web interface to do that. The second way, which in some senses is simpler but is less flexible, is automatic archiving. So this is where you create a schedule. So let me just delete a bit of this stuff from over here. So you create a schedule to archive data every hour, every day, and you specify the folders. So you'll have a list of folders and you'll have a time, and then the data will be archived from the folders or folder each day according to the schedule. Now the benefit of this is that you might have if we just clean up my disk over here a little bit, what we might do is create a folder within our main folder. So if we have our main share that users are writing work into, we can create a folder inside of there called archive or to be archived, and archive the contents of that folder each day. So then, rather than having to use the web interface to do archiving, with auto archiving, people just move files into this archiving folder, and then based on the schedule each day, the contents of that folder is archived to tape, and at the same time, once the data has been successfully written to tape, or you're probably doing cloning, so it's going to be tapes, then the data is deleted from disk. So the automatic archiving doesn't require that the users have any knowledge of Archiware. They just need to be able to move files and folders into a particular folder, and then the next day they'll find that those folders are on tape. Of course, the restore process will also always require access to the web interface. So people would have to be able to log into the web interface to perform restores. So now it should make sense that at the top here you've got the what's called a watch folder or folders. So this is the directories that are going to be archived on the schedule. So I might, for example, create a folder called to be archived on the desktop, just to illustrate how this might work. And then in here, this folder is on the localhost client, and I'm going to use the file browser to go and locate on my desktop the folder called to be archived, and I can add more than one folder into this list if I want. And then down here under the archive schedules, I click new, and let's say I want to archive this folder daily but just on weekdays. So I'm going to specify Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday and Friday, and I want to archive this folder just once a day at 2300 hours, and I'm going to apply that. So now all that remains to be done is to set the auto start flag to enabled and apply the change. And now if we view the job monitor where we can see where scheduled jobs are sitting, you can see that my training archive is now going to run at 2300 hours today, and it will archive the contents of this to be archived folder, which is currently empty. And once it's archived the contents of that folder, there are other settings in the plan where you can elect to delete the contents of the folder that you've just archived. The schedule also allows you to run the archive plan more than once a day, so you could run the plan every 15 minutes or every 4 hours or whatever suits you there. It's also possible to set a period, so you could say archive every hour or every 2 hours between 9 o'clock in the morning, every 2 hours, and 7 o'clock in the evening, for example. So it would just run during working hours, so you could do it that way around if you wished. Okay, so I'm going to disable auto start for now because I don't want this job to start running. The first time I run it, I want it to be manual. The way that you run the job manually is via the manual archiving area of the web interface over here, which we'll come back to in a moment. So that's automatic archiving within the archive plan. Archive options is the next area that I want to visit. And there are a few drop downs here that I'll go through pretty quickly. Scan files before archive, much the same as with backup, collects a full list of everything that's going to be archived when the job first starts, and then while the job is running, it's able to show you a percentage of how far the job is complete towards the 100% of archiving everything that you've asked it to. Volume use can be set to use new media, in which case a new volume, a new tape or file on disk will be used for each archive plan that runs. So each time you run an archive, it will always start a fresh tape, for example. That's not the default, though. The default is to append to the last used volume until it's full and fill volumes up. Job timeout waiting on volumes is how long this job will sit waiting if there are no volumes available or if it runs out of volumes. By default, it'll wait forever in the job monitor, but you can reduce that down so that the job will error, and some people prefer to have a job error when it ran out of volumes so that they can more clearly see that they need to add volumes to the pool. Verification after write. This is an option unique to archive, and what it does is it physically reads a tape volume after it's been written and compares it with what's on the disk. And this is to be extra careful when writing archive data to tape, because there is also the option to delete files after archive. So because archive is all about moving stuff to tape and freeing up disk space, then generally you would want to delete after you've done your archive. And by switching on the verify after write option, you can be sure, or you can be pretty certain that the data that you've written to tape has safely been written because you've been able to read it back. The delete files after archive has two options. You can either delete just the files and leave the folders in place, or you can delete the files and the folders from the directory structure that you've archived. And there is also an option to do an incremental archive. So by default, when you archive a folder or bunch of folders, those folders are written in their entirety to tape and added to the index. But if you're archiving the same data on a regular basis, then you might want to only save the files that have changed since the last time you ran the archive. So running an incremental archive allows you to do that and use less tape space. The options down here will cover in the advanced videos. There are options to run scripts before and after an archive job, or indeed any other kind of job in Archiware. That might allow you to control some database software or do some specific custom things before and after the job runs. Let's apply the changes that we've made so far. The next panel to visit is preview generation. One of the features of Archiware Archive is that we're able to generate thumbnails of still image files, of video and of audio. So this means that in the process of taking media files from disk, from RAID, and writing them to tape, we can provide in the index, when you're browsing to restore the data that you've archived, we can provide a visual thumbnail view of the data that's been archived, so that you can better determine and locate the files that you're interested in pulling back from the archive. And by default, this is done using the QuickTime image generation software that can be installed on Windows and is installed by default on the Mac. And under this panel here, you can choose the size of the still image thumbnails that the product will generate. And then under video and audio, you can choose the length of the video or audio clip that's generated from the source, and also choose to have that clip start some seconds in to avoid having a blank frame at the very beginning of the thumbnail. So let's reduce those settings down a little bit. And at the bottom, you'll see a panel which we'll cover in the advanced archive video, where it's possible to use non-QuickTime, so use some other tools. Maybe you've got a workflow running on Linux and you want to leverage some other tools to generate your image previews and your video previews. and that's possible via this panel here, which allows you to attach simple scripts that are able to pull those previews in and then have them written into the index, written into the archive index. Okay, metadata import is an area that I'm going to cover solely in the advanced archive video, and much the same as with the preview generation, it's possible to use scripts to pull metadata out of the files that you're archiving and also have that written into the archive index. So this means that as well as the archive index being able to show you thumbnails of, let's say, a Photoshop file that you've archived, but we could also read from the Photoshop file metadata such as XMP or EXIF data that will exist within the files that you're archiving and helps to describe those files and helps to find them and make them searchable. And we'll cover this in the advanced archive video, so stay tuned for that. Right, so we now have configured our archive plan, and I think if you'll notice that we didn't really change very much in here at all. Just to recap, the important bits are that the archive plan needs a pool specifying so that it knows where to archive to, and we're not going to do automatic archiving, although you can see how that is set up. We are going to use this plan as a manual archive plan, but it's worth pointing out that any given archive plan can be used either as an automatic archive plan or as a manual archive plan. And the manual archiving, as explained in the drawing earlier, requires that you use the web interface to browse storage and trigger the archive manually. So let's close our archive plan down and click over here to manual archiving. Now, under manual archiving, you will see the file systems attached. Well, actually what you see is a list of clients that you've got configured. So I've got the local host and the Mac Mini server configured as clients, and that means I'm able to browse file systems attached to either of those clients and archive from them. So my target for this archive is going to be this sample pictures folder on the desktop, and this is just for training purposes because it's got a load of pretty small JPEG files in it, but there's 345 JPEGs and one movie, and it'll serve nicely as an example of what archiving looks like, and we'll be able to generate thumbnails from all of these images. So to archive this folder, given that it's located on the desktop of localhost, I'm going to drill down through users and the current user and the desktop and locate sample pics. And I can now use the buttons at the bottom to either add to my archive selection. So this is like a shopping basket through which we can choose various different folders. So I could add another folder, I could add a file, and then I can use the archive button within that little panel to archive all of those files and folders off in one operation. Or if you don't want to use the archive selection, you can just make one selection and click the archive button. Either way, you'll trigger an archive of what you've selected, and you will need first to specify the archive plan that you want to use. Now there's only one archive plan configured here, so that's an easy selection. And for the purposes of this video, I'm going to just hit the start button. It's possible to change the position in the index that in the index structure that this data gets written to. This one here allows you to specify a field to make it easier to search for the job that you're archiving, but we're going to skip that at the moment. It is possible to add additional custom fields to the database and have those have it such that you can enter those fields in at this point, but we'll save that for the advanced video. So I'm going to hit the start button, and the web interface tells me that the job has been submitted for execution. I hit the monitor button to see the job running as before with the backup product if you've watched that video, and pretty quickly that job completed. It's written about 10 megabytes of data, and if we double click on it we can see the stats. Interestingly, down here where it says loading clips, this is the line of the log that reports the thumbnails being generated. So you can see that there were 345 clips generated and loaded up into the index, which matches the 345 files which exist in this folder here. So everything's looking good. So the next step would be to go archive some other data. But once you've got your archive filling up with lots of jobs and you get to the point where you need to pull things back, you're going to go to the Restore tab at the top, and the archive selection within the Restore allows you to browse all of your archive indexes. Currently we've got one archive index, which is called Default Archive, which is the one that we configured our archive plan to write to. So let's go browse that one. And then the interface is quite similar to that of the backup product, with a few additional parts. So what we're doing now is we're browsing a database on disk which has been created by archiving data. And the main area here allows us to browse the folder that we archived, or the folders that we've archived. In this case there's just one down this path here. So this is both displaying the path within the index and allowing me to jump backwards to different folders within it. So we call this a breadcrumb trail. Within the sample pictures folder we can now see our JPEGs that have been archived, and we both see the date that they were archived on and the modification date on the file system and their size. And down at the bottom here you can see we're viewing page 1 and we're paginating, so there are 200 items per page. So to see the remaining items we need to flick to the second page, and there should be a movie at the bottom of that list of files there. So imagining that you've got hundreds of jobs that you've archived off to tape, obviously you need to be able to search to locate jobs of interest. So the search button up here allows you to search for a name, a date on which files were archived, a modification date from the file system, size of files, or the description field that you remember we could have entered when we were performing the archive. So the description could be used to enter a job number that a business uses, and that job number might exist in a database, so you can easily locate a job number and then use that job number within Archiware archive to pull the job back from tape. So in the case of our JPEGs, let's just see what we might be able to search on. We could find this one 2389.jpg by typing name starts with 2389, hit return, that finds us that file. So the searching is quite straightforward. It's also possible to add multiple terms. So the plus and minus button over here allows a second line of terms. So you could be searching on a particular day, but you might only be interested in files with a certain name and so on. So let's just remove that again for now. The gallery button at the top here is the way that we view the thumbnails that we created of the original assets. So this gives us a view of the current selection. If I cancel my search, then we will see all of the files in the current folder listed within the first page, within the first 200. There's a slider here that allows you to increase the size of the previews up to the maximum size that you actually stored. So this makes it much easier to identify the files of interest. And if we flick to the second page, you can see here's our video. We don't show a thumbnail for a video, but for any of these files, double clicking on the tile will show us the information panel for that particular asset within the archive, including any description information that's been entered, and a small video player that allows us to see the video. Because each asset within the archive index can have its own metadata associated with it, manually entered or ingested from the file when it was archived, there's additionally an information view here which shows both a larger preview of the asset and any metadata associated with the asset, and also allows us to edit the metadata. So at this point, if I decide that I want to set a description for this particular asset, I can do that, and then I will be able to search the description field to locate this asset later. So if we just switch off the information and gallery views and I go back to search and I say I want to search descriptions that start with CAMEL, then that allows us to locate that asset in the index. Okay, let's remove our search and go back to the full list of assets. Over on the right hand side here there's an index button. The index button allows us to browse based on the date of the archive. So currently we've only run one archive job at 16/21 today, and so that job is listed here and we are seeing files that were archived on that date. and search based upon what was archived on a particular date. So within this window you'll see a list of all of the dates on which archives were performed, including the ability to select a range via these date pickers. So you might be interested in seeing all of the archives in a particular week, so you can choose that date range. Over on the right hand side here, it's possible to browse the archive index based on pool and volumes within a pool. So you might have an archive job which you run twice, for example, to two different pools to give you a redundancy when you don't have two tape drives. And so this picker over here allows you to select the pool that you're interested in. So you might have two pools with the same data, but you currently have one pool that you're looking to restore from. So this will allow you to choose a pool to restore from. And you can then go in and choose volumes within that pool to restore from. So if you only have one tape and you want to restore the contents of that tape, then you would browse into the pool and into that tape volume, and then you would just see the contents of that tape in the browser. So the index option window is very powerful because it gives you lots of options about working with different volumes and on different dates. Finally, the view menu up top right here is pretty simple. It just allows you to switch on and off the pagination controls and choose to switch pagination off completely if you wish. And it also allows you to choose which columns you want to view in the column view. So currently the description isn't being shown. So if we tick description and add that one in and then relocate ourselves back to the directory that we're interested in, you'll see the description column is being shown over on the right hand side, and our camel video should have the word camel showing up in that column because that's the description that we set for that particular file. Of course, if you want to restore all of these pictures and movies, we would go back to the folder above the folder that we archived and then trigger a restore of that folder. So let's just do that now. Before we do that though, let's simulate having deleted all of these files before as part of the archive job. So the sample pictures folder is now empty, and so I don't need to relocate the restore anywhere else. It can restore back to the original location. So we click on next and Archiware just calculates the number of files. You'll notice the figure here is slightly higher than we were expecting because there are hidden files that represent directories and parent directories that are also going to be restored. And it tells us that this is the volume that the archive wrote to, and therefore that we need to have available and is online in our library. So we can click start now. We can see the job running. You can see the job is completed down at the bottom here with a green light against it, and all the files were restored. And if we go visit the folder that was previously empty, you can see everything has now come back. So this is how you would recover back from tape back to disk, so people can continue to work with some data that had previously been removed. Okay, so that's a pretty quick overview of Archive. You can see under the overview section here, when you're in the Archive module, that you'll get an overview that tells you when the job last ran and whether it was successful or not. And you also get an overview of your pool, so you can see that how much space has been used within the archive disk pool and any other archive pools that you have available. Okay, so I hope that you now have enough information to go configure an archive, and I recommend that you take a look at the advanced archive video next to cover some of the options within the archive plan that we didn't cover in this video. Thanks for watching.